The dark SUV swerved into our lane, headlights blinding, engine roaring. My sister screamed as I wrenched the wheel hard, gravel spraying as we skidded into the ditch. Now I'm holding the vitamin bottle, the one my mother-in-law insisted was safe, my fingers shaking as the label peels away under my nails. The lab's logo glares back at me. This wasn't wellness. It was never about the baby. And the real question? Who else is lying? The heavy, copper scent of the vitamins clung to Sarah Miller's throat long after she forced the capsules down. She gripped the edge of the marble vanity in the guest wing of the Harrison estate, watching her knuckles turn the color of unbaked dough. Upstairs, the rhythmic click-clack of Eleanor Harrison's heels paced the hallway, a metronome of porcelain authority. The sound echoed through the high ceilings, a constant reminder that in this house, even silence was monitored. Sarah reached beneath the loose floorboard behind the pedestal sink, her fingers brushing the frayed spine of a moleskin notebook. She dragged it out, the grit of dust scratching her skin. With a trembling hand, she uncapped a pen, the ink bleeding into the page as she cataloged the morning's tremor. Hands shaking, vision blurred. Third day of the blue pills. Pulse, 88 beats per minute. A sharp rap at the door jolted her. "Sarah, you haven't finished your tea?" Eleanor's voice possessed a polished edge, smooth as a whetstone. Sarah shoved the journal into its dark crevice and stood, smoothing her silk robe. She pulled the door open. Eleanor loomed in the corridor, clutching a silver tray. The steam from the cup smelled of oversteeped chamomile and something metallic, something sharp. "I swallowed them, Eleanor. Everyone." The older woman reached out, her thumb skimming Sarah's jawline with clinical precision. Her skin was dry, like parchment. "Your pulse is racing, dear. It's the humors of the pregnancy. The supplements need time to balance your blood." Sarah forced a smile, though her stomach churned. A bead of sweat trickled down her spine. "I'm tired. My head thumps." "Growth requires sacrifice," Eleanor whispered, her eyes tracking a stray twitch in Sarah's eyelid. "Lie down. I'll bring the next dose at noon." The door clicked shut, the lock engaging with a sound like a bone snapping. Sarah sank onto the bed, the plush duvet feeling like quicksand. She stared at the digital kitchen timer hanging around her neck on a thin silk ribbon. It was her lifeline. Every 60 minutes, it would emit a soft, insistent beep, a signal to ground herself in the data of her own survival. She pressed her fingers to the pulse point in her neck, counting. 1, 2, 3. Her heart felt like a trapped bird beating against a cage of ribs. She needed to get out of this room, away from the antiseptic smell that followed Eleanor like a shroud. She needed a second opinion, one that didn't come from a doctor whose mortgage was paid by the Harrison Foundation. The opportunity came 3 days later, when the heavy iron gates of the estate swung open for a visitor. Chloe, Sarah's younger sister, arrived with the frantic energy of a hummingbird. They met at a small, secluded park 3 miles from the estate, a place where the manicured lawns of Greenwich gave way to a patch of unmanicured woods. The air here smelled of damp earth and pine needles, a relief after the suffocating floral perfumes of the Harrison mansion. Chloe sat on the weathered wooden bench, her fingers tapping a rapid, rhythmic pattern of 4 against her knee. Tap, 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 tap. It was a ritual Sarah knew well, a silent prayer for safety. Chloe's oversized lab coat was stained with blue ink, and her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned Sarah's pale face with growing alarm. "You look gray, Sarah," Chloe whispered, her voice tripping over the words. "Your skin, it's translucent, like wax." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag containing 3 of the large blue and white capsules. I need you to look at these, Chloe. Not as my sister, but as a scientist. Eleanor says they're prenatal vitamins, custom blended for my deficiencies. But every time I take them, the world starts to tilt. My vision goes fuzzy at the edges, like looking through a dirty window. Chloe took the bag, her fingers performing the 4-tap ritual on the plastic before tucking it into her bag. I'll run them at the university lab. I can use the spectroscopy kit after hours. But Sarah, if you think she's messing with your meds, why stay? Why not just come back to the city? And go where? Sarah asked, her voice rising at the end, mimicking the uncertain inflection she had picked up from her husband, Mark. Eleanor has the lawyers. She has the doctors. If I leave now, she'll tell the courts I'm unstable, that the pregnancy hormones have made me a danger to myself. I need proof first. I need to know what's in those pills. The drive back to the estate was a blur of anxiety. Sarah insisted on driving Chloe back to the pharmacy where her sister had left her car. The winding mountain roads of the Connecticut coastline were treacherous, draped in a thick gray mist that tasted of salt and exhaust. Sarah gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. In the rearview mirror, a pair of headlights appeared. They were high, bright, and aggressive. A dark SUV lunged out of the fog. It didn't just pass, it veered inward, the screech of metal on metal erupting as its bumper clipped Sarah's rear fender. The jolt sent a shockwave through the steering column, vibrating into Sarah's elbows. "Sarah!" Chloe screamed, her hands flying to the dashboard. The SUV hit them again, harder this time. The sound was like a sledgehammer hitting a gong. Sarah's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't panic. She calculated. She remembered the driving lessons her father had given her before the heart attack took him. How to steer into the skid, how to use the weight of the car. The SUV swung wide, preparing for a T-bone strike that would send them over the sheer drop to the right. Sarah slammed on the brakes, the tires shrieking in protest. The smell of burning rubber filled the cabin. The SUV roared past, missing them by inches, but the momentum carried Sarah's car toward the edge of a steep embankment. "Hold on," Sarah barked. She spun the wheel, aiming for a cluster of thick shrubs in a deep ditch rather than the jagged rocks further down. The car pitched forward. The world turned upside down for a heartbeat, a chaos of shattering glass, the explosive punch of the airbag, and the groan of twisting steel. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. The air was thick with the smell of scorched dust and the stinging scent of chemical propellant from the bags. Sarah blinked, a trickle of warmth running down her forehead. She looked over at Chloe, who was slumped against the door, dazed but breathing. "Chloe, can you hear me?" A groan was the only answer. Sarah struggled against her seatbelt, the mechanism jammed tight. She reached into the footwell, her fingers searching through the glass shards and debris. There, tucked under the passenger seat, was the spare pack of vitamins she had hidden in her purse. The plastic crinkled under her touch. She shoved it into her bra, the cold plastic biting into her skin. She kicked the driver's side door once, twice, until the hinges shrieked and gave way. She crawled out into the mud, the cold, damp earth soaking into her leggings. She looked up at the road. The dark SUV was gone, leaving nothing but 2 black streaks of rubber on the asphalt. As she knelt in the dirt, trying to catch her breath, she looked at the vitamin pack in her hand. The label was professional, featuring the logo of a high-end organic grocer that Eleanor frequented. But as the rain began to fall, washing away the grime, Sarah noticed something. The ink on the logo was running, blurring into a purple smudge. Beneath the sticker, there was a faint, embossed mark on the plastic. It wasn't a grocery brand. It was a series of numbers and a stylized H, the mark of a private medical laboratory. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The organic delivery van that arrived at the estate every Tuesday wasn't bringing kale and almond milk. It was bringing chemicals. By the time the Harrison security detail found them an hour later, Sarah had hidden the pack. Eleanor arrived in a silver sedan, the scent of antiseptic preceding her as she stepped into the mud. She didn't hug Sarah. She didn't ask if she was hurt. She simply looked at the wreckage and sighed. Such a waste of a fine machine, Sarah. Your nerves are clearly shot. It's time we took more direct control of your environment. The next morning, the environment changed. Sarah woke to the sound of a heavy brass key turning in her bedroom door. When she tried the handle, it didn't budge. The room felt smaller, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the morning sun. A woman was sitting in the armchair by the window. She was middle-aged, with a permanent, fixed smile and eyes as cold as a frozen lake. She wore a crisp white uniform and smelled of lavender and bleach. "Good morning, Sarah," the woman said, her voice a low, soothing hum. "I'm Vera, your new wellness coach. Eleanor is very concerned about your recent accidents. I'm here to ensure you stay on track." Vera didn't leave. She was there when Sarah brushed her teeth, noting the brand of paste. She was there when Sarah tried to use her phone, gently taking it from her hand, with a doctor's orders, dear. No digital stress. The estate had become a prison, and Vera was the warden. Sarah spent 2 days pacing the room, her kitchen timer beeping every hour. Vera would watch her count her pulse, the woman's head tilting in a predatory fashion. On the 3rd day, Chloe appeared at the perimeter fence of the estate, visible from Sarah's balcony. She was waving a manila envelope. Sarah knew she had to get a sample of the new liquid supplement Vera was forcing her to drink to Chloe. During the afternoon meditation hour, Sarah slipped onto the balcony. The air was crisp, smelling of freshly mown grass and the salty tang of the sound. "Chloe," she hissed. Her sister looked up, her fingers tapping the fence post. Tap, 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 tap. "I have the results, Sarah. You need to get out." Sarah pulled a small vial from her pocket, a portion of the morning's dose she had spat back into a container. She wrapped it in a silk scarf and prepared to toss it over the iron spikes of the fence. "Is there a problem, Sarah?" Vera was standing in the doorway, her smile wider than ever. She moved with a terrifying, silent grace, snatching the scarf from Sarah's hand before she could throw it. "We don't throw things, Sarah. It's unrefined," Vera said, her voice dropping into a tuneless hum. The funeral dirge she whistled when things became unpleasant. "And since you're clearly having another episode of paranoia, I think it's time for your sedative." Vera pulled a syringe from her pocket. The needle glinted in the sunlight, a silver tooth ready to bite. "No," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the roar of blood in her ears. "I don't want it." "It wasn't a question, dear." Vera lunged. The struggle was chaotic. They crashed into the marble-topped vanity, the sound of breaking glass punctuating their grunts of effort. Vera was surprisingly strong, her hands like iron bands around Sarah's wrists. The smell of the woman, lavender masking something sour, was overwhelming. Sarah felt the needle graze her arm. Desperation flared. She reached out, her fingers closing around a heavy bronze award Mark had won for a museum design. It was a jagged, heavy thing. She swung it with every ounce of terror-fueled strength she possessed. The bronze connected with Vera's temple with a dull thud. The woman's eyes rolled back, and she slumped to the floor, the syringe skittering across the tiles. Sarah didn't wait to see if she was breathing. She scrambled through the open service window, dropping onto the roof of the portico and sliding down a trellis into the gardens. The thorns tore at her silk robe, drawing thin lines of red on her skin, but she didn't feel the pain. She ran. The Harrison Gardens were a labyrinth of boxwood hedges and stone statuary. Sarah could hear the shouts of the security guards behind her, their heavy boots thumping on the gravel paths. She ducked into the gardener's shed, a small stone structure near the edge of the woods. The air inside was cool and smelled of damp earth and rust. She looked around for a shovel, a rake, anything to use as a weapon. Her hand brushed against a loose floorboard near the potting bench. Thinking it might be a place to hide, she pried it up, subverted. Inside the hollow space, Sarah's fingers met the cold, smooth surface of a leather-bound expansion file. Her heart leaped. This was it. The gardener must have been an ally, someone collecting evidence against Eleanor. Perhaps the old man who trimmed the hedges had seen the same rot she had. She pulled the file out, her breath coming in shallow hitches. "Thank God," she whispered, her mind already racing toward the police station. With this in hand, she wasn't just a runaway wife. She was a witness with a paper trail. She flipped the file open, expecting to see logs of chemical deliveries or perhaps photos of Eleanor's private meetings. Instead, the first page was a high-resolution photograph of Mark. He was sitting in a doctor's office, his face buried in his hands. Sarah frowned. She turned the page. It was a medical report from a fertility clinic in Manhattan, dated 3 years ago. The words blurred before her eyes, then snapped into focus. Patient, Mark Harrison. Diagnosis, azoospermia. Prognosis, permanent sterility. Asterisk. Sarah felt the floor tilt. A cold, oily sensation slid down her spine. If Mark was sterile, then the prenatal vitamins Eleanor had been shoving down her throat for months weren't vitamins at all. They weren't meant to help her conceive a Harrison heir. She turned more pages, her hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. There were notes in a cramped, neat handwriting she recognized instantly. Eleanor's hand. Subject Sarah. Dosage increased to 50 milligrams. Observation. Subject reports dizziness. Good. The uterine lining must be made inhospitable. We cannot allow the Miller blood to take root if the Harrison line is already dead. If we cannot have a biological legacy, we will have a controlled one. The gardener hadn't been an ally. The shed was a secondary filing cabinet for the family's darkest secrets, a place where Eleanor kept the truth of her son's failure tucked away like a weed. Sarah realized with a sickening jolt that she wasn't being prepared for motherhood. She was being chemically sterilized. Her body turned into a laboratory for Eleanor's obsession with purity. The vitamins were poison, designed to ensure that Sarah could never, ever have a child with anyone else, preserving a pure image of a marriage that was a hollow shell. The sound of the shed door creaking open made Sarah's heart stop. She looked up, the medical records clutched to her chest. Mark stood in the doorway. His shadow stretched long across the dirt floor, his face a mask of weary disappointment. "You shouldn't have come in here, Sarah," he said. His voice had that rising, uncertain inflection, but his eyes were flat and hard. "Mother said you were getting too curious for your own good." "Mark," Sarah gasped, holding up the file. "You're sterile. You've known this whole time. You let her give me those pills?" Mark stepped into the shed, the smell of his expensive cologne mixing with the scent of fertilizer. He didn't look at the file. He looked at his watch. It's about the legacy, Sarah. We have to protect the name. If people knew, if the board knew I couldn't, the stock would plummet. Mother is just trying to manage the situation. Manage it? Sarah screamed. She's destroying me. She's burning out my insides so I can be a perfect sterile wife for your perfect sterile life. She tried to push past him, but Mark caught her arm. His grip was surprisingly firm, the strength of a man who had spent his life building walls. It's for the best, Sarah. You'll see. Once you're at the retreat, you'll be so much calmer. He signaled over his shoulder. 2 security guards stepped out of the shadows of the trees, their faces obscured by the twilight. Sarah fought, kicking and biting, the medical records scattering like autumn leaves across the floor. The struggle was short and brutal. A heavy hand clamped over her mouth, the scent of a chemical-soaked rag filling her nose. The world began to dissolve into gray mist. The last thing she saw was Mark, straightening his tie 3 times, once for his father, once for his wife, and once for the lie he was living. When Sarah woke, the world was a blur of white and chrome. Her head throbbed with a rhythmic ache that matched the slow, heavy beat of her heart. She was lying on a bed with high, silver rails. The air was cold and smelled of ozone. She tried to move her hands, but they were heavy, weighted down by soft velvet restraints. She was in the nursery, the room Eleanor had decorated months ago in anticipation of a grandchild. But the windows were gone, replaced by smooth, seamless panels of reinforced glass. The door was a slab of brushed steel, lacking a handle on the inside. Eleanor sat in a rocking chair in the corner, a silver tray of tea on the table beside her. She was humming that low, haunting dirge. "You're awake," Eleanor said, her voice clinical. "The sedation was a bit heavy, but your vitals are stable. I've been monitoring your pulse myself." "Why?" Sarah rasped, her throat feeling like it was lined with sandpaper. "If Mark can't have children, why do this to me?" Eleanor stood, her posture rigid. She walked to the bed and adjusted the blanket, her fingers skimming Sarah's cheek like a dry leaf. "The Harrison name is a fortress, Sarah. Fortresses require maintenance. A wife who cannot conceive is a tragedy. A wife who chooses not to conceive is a scandal. By ensuring the choice is taken away, we create a narrative of shared misfortune. You and Mark will be the grieving couple, the philanthropic duo dedicated to the arts, because they could not have a family of their own. It is a very sympathetic image." "You're a monster," Sarah whispered. "I am a gardener," Eleanor corrected, her eyes flashing. "I pull the weeds so the rose can grow. Your sister, however, has become a very persistent weed." She held up Sarah's phone. A message from Chloe was visible on the screen. "Sarah, the lab results are in. It's not just hormone blockers. There's traces of arsenic. She's slowly shutting down your organs. Get out now." Eleanor deleted the message with a flick of her thumb. "Chloe is being handled. She's a bright girl, but she doesn't understand the scale of what she's fighting. Now, sleep, Sarah. The transport for the retreat arrives at dawn. You'll find the air in the mountains very final." Eleanor left, the steel door hissing shut with a sound of pressurized air. Sarah lay in the silence, the only sound the soft beep of the kitchen timer still hanging around her neck. It was 3 a.m. She didn't panic. She remembered the house. She had lived here for 3 years, and she had spent much of that time wandering the halls, looking at the architecture Mark so loved. The nursery was part of the old wing, built in the 1920s. Behind the modern wallpaper and the soundproof padding, there was a skeleton of wood and wire. She looked at the service bell on the wall, an antique feature Eleanor had kept for its charm. if she could reach the wire. She began to work her right hand. The velvet restraint was tight, but her wrist was thin from weeks of nausea. She tucked her thumb into her palm, the bones clicking as she compressed her hand. The pain was sharp, a white-hot spike through her arm, but she leaned into it. She pulled. Skin tore. Blood made the velvet slick. With a final, agonizing wrench, her hand slid free. She lunged for the service bell, tearing the decorative silk tassel away to reveal the copper wire beneath. She twisted it, snapping off a 6-inch length. The lock on the steel door was electronic, but the emergency manual override was hidden behind a small brass plate near the floor. A fire safety requirement. Sarah dropped to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She jammed the wire into the override slot, feeling for the tumblers. She had spent her teenage years picking the locks on her father's liquor cabinet. The mechanics were the same, even if the stakes were life and death. Click, click. The door groaned. The seal broke with a hiss of air. Sarah slipped into the hallway. The estate was dark, the only light the pale blue glow of the security monitors in the distance. She knew the main exits would be guarded, but the Harrisons had a weakness. They ignored the help. She found the ventilation shaft in the laundry room, a wide, galvanized steel throat that led to the roof. She climbed, the cold metal biting into her palms, the smell of lint and old soap filling her lungs. She emerged onto the slate roof, the night air hitting her like a bucket of ice water. She didn't go for the cars. She went for the woods. She ran until her lungs burned, until the beep of her timer signaled the hour. And then she ran some more. 3 hours later, she was standing in the lobby of the Federal Building in downtown Hartford, clutching the medical file she had snatched back from the gardener's shed and the recorder on her phone, which had been running in the nursery, capturing Eleanor's gardener's speech in crystal-clear digital audio. The fallout was a tectonic shift. The organic grocer was raided by federal agents by noon, revealing a laboratory filled with unlabeled brown bottles and enough hormonal disruptors to sterilize a small city. Richard Bennett, the lab director, folded within an hour, trading his ledger of Eleanor's wellness directives for a plea deal. The arrest of Eleanor and Mark Harrison was the lead story on every news cycle for a month. The image of Eleanor being led from the estate in handcuffs, her silver bob perfectly in place even as she spat at the cameras, became the defining image of the Greenwich poisoner case. Mark followed her, his head down, his voice rising in frantic, uncertain questions to his lawyers. 6 months later, Sarah Miller stood on a jagged ridge in the North Cascades, just outside of Seattle. The air was thin and sharp, smelling of ancient ice and cedar. There was no scent of antiseptic here, no copper tang of vitamins. She took a deep breath, feeling her lungs expand fully, without the tightness that had plagued her for years. Her vision was clear, the colors of the sunset, vibrant oranges and deep, bruised purples, sharp and brilliant. Chloe was a few yards ahead, her fingers tapping a rhythm of 4 against her hiking pole. Tap, 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 tap. She turned and smiled, her face bright with the health of someone who no longer lived in a laboratory. Sarah reached up and unclipped the kitchen timer from her neck. She looked at it for a moment. The plastic scratched, the ribbon frayed. It had been her heartbeat when she didn't trust her own. She threw it. It sailed through the crisp mountain air, a small black speck against the vastness of the horizon, before vanishing into the valley below. Sarah didn't need to count her pulse anymore. She could feel it, steady, strong, and entirely her own. She turned away from the edge and began to climb, her boots treading firmly on the solid, unyielding earth, leaving the shadows of the Harrison estate 1,000 miles behind.